Hello, everyone. Welcome to the very first Commodity Masterclass of the Net Zero Coalition of Action. I'm Sharon Bly. I lead health and sustainability at the Consumer Goods Forum, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by Sarah Lockwood of Danone, who's going to bring us into a deep dive today into decarbonisation in the dairy value chain. Welcome, Sarah. I'm absolutely thrilled that we're having this session, and thank you for kicking off a series that we will be running across the year at the Consumer Goods Forum. So like all things at the Consumer Goods Forum, we will, of course, respect the antitrust caution statement in all of the learnings and insights and sharing that will happen today. So that will be respected across today's masterclass session. So just to give you some context, the Net Zero Coalition of Action was created in January 2024. Our members really looked at how we can accelerate progress to achieve net zero for people and planet. And one of the areas where we felt we could accelerate learning across our entire sector was looking at deep dives into specific commodities. You can see here we have an entire curriculum that will run this year and right into 2025. And Sarah and the team at Danone have agreed to kick off the very first session today, where we will focus on dairy. This asset obviously is live on our website along with the slides, so please do share this with your colleagues, the in-field operational teams, procurement teams that might benefit from all of the learnings and insights that Sarah will share with you today. So Sarah, big thank you for everything you're going to share today, and really look forward to getting into the details of dairy and decarbonisation. So Sarah, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Sharon. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sarah. I'm in charge of Global Regenerative Agriculture at Danone, and I have the great pleasure to be with you today to kickstart the CGF Masterclass series with dairy. But before deep diving into content, I'd like to briefly introduce Danone so that you better understand our perspective on decarbonization. Then I'll share some basics around the carbon footprint of dairy farms so that everyone starts from the same page. Deep diving into content, we look at the global dairy context, and then at the diversity of farming systems to share some of the regional specificities. We'll then discuss some key challenges of decarbonization before exploring together some of the solutions and looking into concrete case studies. So Danone is a French food company with a global reach. We focus on three core businesses: essential dairy and plant-based, specialized nutrition, and water. And to sustain these activities, we source a large diversity of ingredients across the world, including fresh milk and dairy ingredients. Fresh milk we source directly from 58,000 farmers across the world. Without a surprise, as a food and beverage company, our scope 3 represents 95% of our total footprint. And milk and dairy ingredients alone represent more than 50%, just to tell you the importance of dairy in our decarbonization journey. We have a long sustainability track record. We officially started our decarbonization journey in 2015 with a pretty bold commitment at the time to become net zero by 2050. Then in 2020, we adopted the Société à Mission status, and amongst the KPIs there, we included two KPIs, one on climate and one on regenerative agriculture. In 2022, we decided to submit a 1.5 SBTi target, including FLAG. And we decided then to step up our game. And in 2023, we aligned with the Global Methane Pledge. And most recently, we got approval of our net zero science-based target by SBTi. So I imagine that in the call today, we have a diversity of maturity levels linked to decarbonization and dairy. But maybe the message here is that we're really looking forward and hoping to amplify all these efforts with each of you as a collective and at each level of the value chain. So for those of you that would not be fully familiar with the carbon footprint of dairy farms, so dairy contributes to about 5% of global emissions, and it emits three types of greenhouse gases: carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. Methane is a key battle for us. Why? Because methane has a very short lifetime in the atmosphere compared to CO2. It also has 80 times higher warming potential than CO2. So what does this mean? It means that it's the fastest and most powerful opportunity to curb GHG emissions. So now, where do emissions come from? The graph that you see on the right is a little bit complex because carbon cycle is complex. But let's simplify. You see a cow. Cow eats feed. To be produced, the feed emits greenhouse gases. The cow, when eating feeds, is digesting. We call it enteric fermentation. And via this activity, it emits methane. And then you have manure, the waste. What you see also on this graph is this removal, this downward arrow. What is this? Maybe some of you have heard of this. It's about the potential to capture carbon from the atmosphere and store it into the soil. And that thanks to great agronomic practices and regenerative agriculture principles. These removals has potential, yet it's difficult to capture at the moment because the international guidance through GHG protocol is not completely defined as we speak. So we looked at three main drivers of emission. Enteric fermentation is the biggest one, followed by feed, followed by manure. You also see the impact of infrastructure and utilities, but which is really minor compared to the other three. So before deep diving into solutions, let's have a quick look at the global context. So milk is a global commodity. It means that decarbonization of dairy sector is a global and a collective challenge. There is 1 billion tons of dairy products produced every year. They come from top 9 producing markets, out of which main one are India, EU, and the US. What this is hiding though is past trends and future trends. And this is critical to understand whenever we're thinking about decarbonization strategy, because where we invest now needs to make sense for tomorrow. Dairy products are consumed all around the world, and so every year massive quantities of dairy products are traded between countries, the EU and New Zealand being the top dairy exporters. All these market trends hide something essential: people and animals behind dairy production. Nearly 10% of the world population directly depends on dairy farming for livelihoods. There would be 130 million dairy farms in the world, 270 million cows. These numbers are staggering. And when you think that each day a cow can eat up to 40 to 50 kilos of food and drink up to 200 liters of water, then we start to understand that, yes, there's not only a carbon footprint that we need to manage, there is also a land footprint and a water footprint. And this is also essential to keep in mind whenever we're building relevant strategies for decarbonization. So behind this global overview, of course, there are very different realities. And there is a large diversity of dairy farming models. So despite decarbonization in dairy being a global challenge, it has to be approached differently depending on the farming system, because each farming system will have its own potential and its own constraints for reductions. So looking at the farming model, there could be many different ways of looking at it, but let's take 5 different lenses, starting with size. So you can have very, very small farms, 1, 2, 3 cows, to very large farms, more than 1,000 cows. It's what you see in the pictures here. On the left-hand side, you have a small Moroccan farm, and rightly next to it, you see a large dairy farm in the US. Smallholders represent the very, very large majority of farms in the world. And some statistics show that actually farms with more than 100 cows might represent less than 1% of total farms in the world. The second criteria we can look at is specialization. Some farms are completely specialized and focused on dairy, just cattle rearing and the production of milk. Some of them include as well the production of animal feed. And for some others, dairy is not even the main activity, it's just a side benefit alongside meat and eggs production or cash crops. And this is also important whenever we think about decarbonization, because our strategy will be very different. Regarding feeding and housing, 3 main systems there. You have farms where cows are fully on pasture all year long, it's pastoral system. At the opposite, you have confined systems where cows are completely indoors all the time. And then you have semi-confined, where part of the year they're inside, part of the year they're outside. The large majority of farming systems are semi-confined. And then the 4th criteria is the intensity. You have farms that will be very low productive or very extensive. and up to farms that are really highly productive with more than 10,000 liters per cow per year. And this is what we can see here when we zoom in on the productivity levels in the different markets. So you see the USA with really high productivity levels, followed by EU, and then a productivity level that can be pretty low in India or Brazil or Turkey in average. So the characteristic of each farming system and the management maturity will determine both their initial footprint and their potential for reduction. And the productivity is a key component of the footprint of dairy farms. And that's what you see here in the third line, the carbon baseline. So you can have some farms that will be below 1 kilo of CO2 per kilo of milk. Some of them could be even up to 5 or 6. And it very much depends on the type of farming systems. But farms that tend to be more productive will tend to have a much better carbon baseline. So CGF has prepared a number of fact sheets with regional specificities that will be available for download. So I invite you to look at the Masterclass webpage. I won't go into detail here. So solutions for decarbonization. Before jumping into this, we need to think, what are the key challenges for decarbonization? So what you see here is a number of decarbonization challenges across commodities. It will be the same structure across the Masterclass series. And we've been asked to highlight the one that would be the most relevant for dairy. Difficult to pick, I have to admit, but we picked 7 of them. So the first one, we talked about it already, is a large and fragmented supplier landscape. So there are many, many smallholders. And the question is, how to reach them all? And what are the roles of local relays? The second challenge is a high degree of variability in systems across regions. And there's no one size fits all. So what are the solutions we need to pick? What are the roles of farm archetypes maybe in scaling up? The third key challenge is a strong dependency on nature, on land, on water, on climate, on animals. And weirdly enough, this is a challenge that is often forgotten, even when speaking about agriculture. And so what does this mean? It means that how can we manage with uncertainties? How can we manage the incompressible time of agriculture? Because regarding uncertainties, irrespective of the project we put in place and the reductions that we expect from our action, it could very well be that external factors will impact our performance. It could be the impact of heat waves, for instance, on animal production. It could be the impact of droughts on feed quality, then on diet, then animal production, and then carbon footprints. It could be impact of diseases on the herd. So how can we accept that we can't control it all? And how can we try and mitigate the impact of external factors? Maybe through comforts, including shade outdoors or fans and sprinklers indoors. Could be about preventing diseases, building soil structure and fertility to avoid irreversible impact of droughts or erosions, etc. And then regarding the incompressible time frame of agriculture, let's keep in mind that it takes at least a year for one crop, several years for a crop rotation, at least 3 years to raise a cow. So the question is how to accept as companies to invest now on solutions that we know will deliver only in a few years from now. And so the key challenge when building our decarbonization roadmap as a food company is not only the question of total tons reduced over time, but also the question of speed and dynamics of reduction. Because when we commit to SBTi, we don't only commit to achieve reduction by 2030 or net zero by 2050, we also commit to show impact and progress year on year. A fourth challenge is linked to practices, technical solutions themselves. So more than a lack of solutions to start, it's really the speed and rate of adoption of best practices that we need to reflect on. And so the question there is, what's the roles of mindset and support in scaling the existing best practices? And then I invite you actually, if you have started already the work on the decarbonization journey, to look at how are performing your best-in-class farmers today. And if all your portfolio of farms and suppliers were performing the same way as your best-in-class, would you still achieve your target or not? Because that is a pretty interesting exercise that most likely will show you that we will need low carbon technologies available and affordable at scale if really we want the dairy sector to be able to achieve its objectives. So how can we boost and give access to these breakthrough innovations? Another challenge is the lack, or more than the lack of accurate carbon data, I would rather speak about the lack of comparability, leading to difficulty to have a credible footprint and to be able to valorize also our efforts. The tricky point as well of this challenge is that often data become the end rather than a mean to an end, creating extra complexity and burden for farmers without creating value for them. So how can we create value for all when collecting data and sharing it, cascading it across the value chain? And last but not least, lack of financing. And there, more than lack of financing, I'd rather call for the lack of financing mechanisms. Because collectively, from the private and public sector, we know money is there. The question is, how can we invest in the relevant way? How can we share the cost across the value chain? How to cover specific financing needs, upfront cost, capex on farm, transition risks? How can we make sure that small and medium farms that are less bankable than big farms also have access to the relevant financing mechanisms? And so we need to keep in mind all these challenges when designing our strategies for decarbonization. And it's important to have a clear vision on the path. And for Danone, it's really about combining efficiency and regenerative agriculture practices. So we highlighted before that emissions were coming primarily from enteric fermentation, feed, and manure. So optimizing the herd management, looking after animal welfare, optimizing diet and feed production contribute to efficiency. But there's also the question of how do we make sure that manure is spread in the right way, that soil is taken care of, that water is preserved, and all of these regenerative agriculture practices. And why it's relevant is because it's a triple win. It brings an impact on long-term productivity and resilience of our farming systems. It brings an impact on competitiveness, reducing the cost per liter, and it has also benefits on carbon and methane reduction per liter. So if we zoom in, for instance, on herd management that I just mentioned, there are a number of practices, of course, that we can explore. There's about feed management, the impact of diet and nutrient optimization. In terms of herd management, it's about the reproduction management. There are, for instance, promising innovations or practices in terms of early calves grouping that would allow them to have better animal welfare and health of the herd, leading to lactating cows that are more productive. We also have some practices that allow to tackle heat stress or overall co-comfort. So for heat stress, for instance, it could be just bringing some shade to the cows. Co-comfort would also come with some connected sensors, which can really monitor the activities of the cows and detect any discomfort. When we look at manure, just cherry picking as well, so you have systems where you have manure with no proper storage, which is an absolute no-go. And the question is already, how can we just store manure properly? That's the very first base. And then the second question is, can we actually transform and create value out of it? And this is where you start to see biodigesters, for instance. And when we look at feed, the important part here is how can we move from conventional practices, monocropping of corn, for instance, to regenerative farming? So avoiding the monocropping here and making sure that we have better integration of livestock into the system. We have crop rotations with several species in the rotation. We have soil cover. We minimize soil disturbance, all the principle of regenerative agriculture. So that being said, how do we select the right solutions when we build our roadmaps? How do we know how to find the right balance between speed and long-lasting transformation that is much needed? So we like to look at it through 4 lenses. One absolute prerequisite is the relevance to the farm types and geographies. We discussed it a bit before. Then there's going to be the carbon reduction potential. Some of the solutions will have more potential in some region than others, and overall, some more potential than others. Then there's the time to impact. Some of the solutions that are available, we have a very, pretty immediate impact. I'm thinking, for instance, feed additives, manual infrastructure. Others will have a longer time to impact. That could be whenever there is a change of mindset and time for adoption. And that could also be wherever we count on genomics, for instance, so 3 years for a cow, or through the capacity of soil to build health and sequester carbon, and that takes time. And then the fourth lens would be the return on investment for farmers. And this is a critical one because some of the solutions will have a return on investment for farmers in the short or medium terms. Some others won't. So I won't deep dive into all of this, but the idea is just to show you 6 key levers and how relevant they are to different farming systems. So just to take a very concrete example, in very small, low productive farms, we'll really tend to go back to basics, making sure farmers give water, feed to their cows, making sure we look at the productivity of the farming systems to be able to improve the carbon footprint. In a very optimized, intensive farm, we'll be looking more at innovation and infrastructure to continue and reduce the carbon footprint. So this is something that was presented last year at the Climate Week by Pathways to Dairy Net Zero, which I found really interesting. For those of you that would not be aware, I really invite you to look at that document because it really shows the range of farming systems, the productivity, and the type of levers that can be applied to different farming systems. So as mentioned before, beside the relevance of a solution for a given farming system, we also need to consider the carbon reduction potential, the time to impact, and the expected ROI for farmers. In particular, the ROI for farmers is critical for scalability and long-lasting impact. So we should absolutely strive to bring solutions to farms that are also having a positive effects on the economics of the farm. And the good thing is that a number of levers for decarbonization do. Thinking of herd management, for instance, that will help with herd productivity. Thinking of animal health, animal welfare, management of young stock. It could be also about a manure infrastructure to valorize manure, biodigesters, for instance, that could create electricity that could be recycled in the farms, increasing circularity and reducing cost of electricity. In the longer term, we can think about soil health because it will build soil fertility, hence building long-term yield improvement, and at the same time reducing the cost of inputs to the farm. On the other side, a number of levers might have promising carbon reduction potential, but adding recurring costs to the farm without adding benefits to them economically. This is, for instance, the case of some of the methane innovations like feed additives. So that we need to be very aware of when we're bringing, when is the right time to bring these innovations to farm, because it will impact the economics. So I would like now to move a bit away from the theory so that we could look at concrete case studies to illustrate our dairy transformation journey. Let's go to North America. There you have 50 large dairy farms and their growers working on regenerative agriculture. It represents almost 100% of our dairy farms there. The focus, increasing crop yields, improving soil health so that we can capture carbon sequestration and we can develop long-term farm resilience, leading to cost avoidance for farmers. The impact we could observe so far, minus 120 kton of CO2, minus 300 or more kton of soil erosion, $3 million of cost avoidance for farmers. If you go and travel to North Africa, let's go to Morocco and visit the Khlibladi farmers. So in Morocco, we're working now with 10,000 smallholders farms. So to the question of before, how do we reach them all? We do so through collection centers. We need to make sure that we have this local relay and professional relay and services for dairy farms around. The focus there is really smallholders empowerment, productivity improvement leading to GHG reductions, and social outcomes. And so thanks to the first phase of this project, we already demonstrated increased productivity and revenue and indirect carbon reductions per kilo of milk. If we now move to France, let's go and visit Les Deux Pieds sur Terre farmers. So in France, we have more than 1,000 dairy farms. It's a mixed farm, small farms with pasture most of the time. And there also we have a great coverage of the program, 92% of our supply. The focus in France is very different from Morocco and North America. There, we're working on herd management, soil health, feed autonomy, pesticide reduction. It's a really holistic approach in France that we have. We also work on farmer empowerment and pride, which is critical nowadays to restore pride in the dairy sector. In terms of impact, the project has been there since 2016, and we could demonstrate minus 10% of CO2 emissions per liter of milk. And then let's go right next to France, to Belgium. There, we can visit 80 mid-sized intensive farms, highly optimized. What do we do there? They already have really good herd management. They already have top-notch animal welfare. They already have really good diet and formulation. What's next? What remains to be done? And so there the focus will be on methane reduction through innovation. Could be through feed additives or manual transformation. And through feed additives, for instance, we would expect a potential of 12% reduction of CO2 equivalent per farm, thanks to feed additives. So of course, we would not be able to do any of this without our suppliers and farmers. And so there, I'd like to go back to the two situations I mentioned at the very beginning. We have direct sourcing with direct contracts with our farmers, and indirect sourcing when we source dairy ingredients, for instance, from suppliers. So in the case of direct sourcing, what we find absolutely key is a proximity with farmers, with dedicated teams locally, and sometimes with collection centers to act as a hub, like a relay locally. It's also about making sure we track performance, we benchmark farmers, and we showcase the best practices from farmers to farmers. It goes for sure with trainings and technical support, so collective or individual. This would not be enough though, and in a number of geographies, we make sure we build these long-term contracts wherever possible, sharing risk and ensuring margin for the farmers. And then we are supporting them with access to finance where we can. When we look at indirect sourcing, there we really invest into pre-competitive approaches. And we rely heavily on SDP, the Sustainable Dairy Partnership. It's a pre-competitive sustainability engagement framework that reunites dairy processors, dairy buyers, traders, some retailers, and really makes sure that we can work together on some of the critical challenges for dairy, including decarbonization, but also deforestation, animal welfare, for instance. Beyond SDP, we also then work on including decarbonization target as part of our contracts with some of the dairy suppliers, and we invest in on-the-ground project and on landscape projects. So as this masterclass is coming to an end, I would like to recap the key messages. One, let's start now. Many solutions are there, combining efficiency and resilience, and speed is of essence. Second, let's call for innovation, and let's have the courage to transform our dairy supply chains. Because a cow is a ruminant, it means it will always produce methane. And incremental solutions will help, of course, but it won't solve it all. Third, data and reporting. Data and reporting must be at the service of impact. They are a mean to an end. They are essential to credibility, but let's focus on minimizing complexity, on actionability, and value creation for all. Fourth, share decarbonization costs, because there will be upfront or recurring costs linked to decarbonization, irrespective of farmed ROI in the short or long term. So we need the contribution from all players in the value chain if we want this decarbonization journey to be successful. Also, what we need to advocate for collectively is dairy decarbonization efforts to be accounted within the food and ag value chain so that our efforts are not leaked into other sectors. And fifth, last but not least, no one has all the answers. So we shared with you part of our journey, the experience we have so far on decarbonization. Has it been easy? For sure not. Will it continue to be challenging? Yes. And is it worth it though? Of course, because it's incredible to be part of this transformation. So let's have the courage collectively to take action despite all the uncertainties. And let's have the humility to recognize that no, we don't know it all. No, we don't have all the answers. Yes, we failed when trying a number of things, But then let's learn from each other, because maybe you succeeded where we didn't manage, and the other way around. To conclude, I would like to invite you to the following. Join pre-competitive efforts. Across the value chain, we need each of you in there. Could be dairy farmers, dairy processors, buyers, traders, retailers. Because it can help us coordinate metrics, accounting methodologies, and reporting frameworks. We are contributing, for instance, to WBC work, site platform, including SDP, the Cool Farm Alliance community, and using the Cool Farm tool, but also VCI, Value Change Initiative, to name a few. It's also about sharing learnings, expertise, and resources, as we mentioned before. It's about also stimulating innovation. So, for instance, we joined a global methane hub to catalyze solutions for anti-fermentations. Pre-competitive efforts and collaborations are absolutely key, but we also need to reflect on our own organizations. Because the key question is, are we fit for scaling solutions for decarbonization? And what we see with Decarbonization Challenge is that it's a real stress test for our organizations, for our vision targets, for our governance, for our financing, the way we consider ROI, for our capabilities, our expertise. So for instance, in Danone, what was a game changer is including climate as a KPI for entreprise à mission, as a status for the company, but also submitting to SBTi. It was a game changer to cascade this climate target through the company and make it an absolute priority. In terms of governance, we reunited teams, procurement, sustainability, finance. In terms of financing and ROI, we started to reconsider the way we're looking at ROI of projects, accepting that we could invest now for impact that would happen in a few years from now, making sure that if we invest now, we can continue to invest tomorrow, because it's not about getting started and then stop it, let it go. It's about also consistency in time if we want to be able to successfully deliver on this critical journey for dairy. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sarah, for all of that information, and I think a really clear call to action to all of the members of the Consumer Goods Forum. You're obviously listening back to this recording that you've downloaded from our website, and you have all of the slides as well. If you do want to follow up with Sarah and you do have questions on some of the levers and solutions that Sarah shared on today's call, please do reach out to me, and I will make sure that we will follow up. And I would encourage you to continue to follow us on our commodity masterclasses as they continue to run throughout the year. Sarah, a huge thank you for all of the information that you shared today, all of your transparency about the challenges and the opportunities that lie in decarbonisation along the dairy value chain. Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon.